Hello, new subscribers. Welcome, new subscribers. Thank you for following us and subscribing to us and following the channel and supporting us to our subscribers who've been with us for a while. Thank you for supporting the channel. I'm Reverend Penelope Stewart. We have a Facebook page. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check out our services that we offer on Facebook and our courses that we have going on. Remember in the Hoodoo Medicine video, I said that I will come back here and do a video on We Are Not Just Africans, the Black Native Americans by Clyde Winters. I said I would come back, and this is a really good book. I enjoyed it. I got into this book exploring my own, just trying to find out more about myself and my DNA and why I was connecting with the land, the mounds and all of that, why I was drawn there, because I was just drawn there. And the more I started learning more about the people at the mounds and the pre-Columbian civilization, and finding out there are many pyramids right over here in the Americas. And, I was just blown away by the fact that there were Black Native Americans. I like calling them Aboriginal or indigenous people. I don't like that term because when I see Native Americans on TV, they didn't look like me. I also began to accept the concept when I lived in Tulsa. I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma for about almost a year. And I seen Native Americans that look like me. In fact, maybe about 2 years ago, and I think the ancestors were sending me messages then. I did a vending event at the Paranormal Expo at the museum here in Little Rock, and there was a lady with a tent on the other side. I think me and her were the only minorities there. So I went over to speak to her, and I was just under the impression that she was, black. I thought she was black. And when I, told her that, I was telling her I have a black-owned business, and I thought maybe I'll come over and talk to her because she's a black business owner. And she said, "No, I'm not black. I'm Native American." And she looked me and her looked alike, same complexion and everything. I could not believe it. I was floored. Again, I was faced with that. And so I began to really start, accepting that this history is fact, especially when I started following the archaeological evidence. There is an enormous amount of archaeological evidence that confirms this fact. They won't talk about it. They don't talk about it that much in our, public education, far as school or anything like that. They don't talk about it that much. It's such a controversial topic, especially for African Americans, because a lot of people think that we're trying to claim something that we're not, and that is not the case. They were already freed, and you can see that too by looking at some of the free black people that were already here in the Americas. All black people were not enslaved. There were also some that were free. You see that with I think with one of the presidents, one of our very first presidents was John Hanson, if I'm not mistaken. He was a black president. So everyone was not enslaved. There was, this land was populated by people of color. And like I said, this history is very controversial. It's controversial among African Americans, quote unquote African Americans, and it's very controversial among some of the other people as well. So I'm going to dive in, but like I said, I like this book. The book is called We Are Not Just Africans, the Black Native Americans by Clyde Winters. I enjoyed this book. The introduction. He says, "We are not just African, in this title of my book, because Afro-Americans are more than descendants of sub-Saharan Africans, we have been lied to about Black history. Our ancestors include Black Europeans and Black Native Americans. When I was growing up, my mother made it clear that we were part Choctaw. So in 1968 or 1969, I took a survey at my high school in Chicago and found over 40% of my classmates had Indian heritage. Now, how many of us can tell that, especially down south, you hear a lot of us say we're part Indian. You know, my great-grandmother told my mom this, okay? At the time, many people laughed at us because they only saw Lakota and Apache Native Americans on TV today. Because of the World Wide Web, there are numerous pictures of Black Native Americans. And so this author also has so many wonderful pictures of dark-skinned people being here. Some of them is old art that this author has dug out and presented it here in the book. So, you know, it's worth having. I have it as an ebook. If there was a lot of information, especially when he goes into the DNA, very well written. There's a lot of documented, you know, this author goes on and just cites everything that he finds. This work is documented. It's totally documented. He put the references and citations that did an excellent job of citing this work. So this is something that we should have in your library. You should have it somewhere in your library because it's worth having. It's very useful. It's a very useful book. The major African group to settle ancient America was the Manding people. In southwestern United States, Kabiza D. Vaca said that the Mandinka people were a dominant group. This word Mandinka agrees with the term Mandinka, used to denote the Manding speaking people. Moreover, in Mexico and Panama, we have many place names that allude to ancient Manding presence. For example, in Panama, we find Sierra de Mali mountain range in Darien east of the Gulf, and San Miguel, the Manding River, the Manding Bay. The Black Native Americans of North America were mainly descendants of Paleo-Americans and Africans who sailed to America between 12,000 BC to 1492 AD. So like I said, this author does a very good job of documenting and finding the sources, citing his sources. It was just great in here. I enjoyed, you know, knowing that this information was had been cited and could be accounted for. That was important to me. You know, the Europeans called the people they found in the Americans Indians because when they met these populations that were dark-skinned like the Dravidians and black people of South India, although the cowboy movies popularized the image of Native Americans as Mongoloid Indians like the Apache and the other groups, Americans fought in the late 1800s. The usual symbol of American Indians were the black Native Americans who looked exactly like Africans except for straight hair. The Spanish described the Aztecs as black, and then he depicts a picture of the Aztecs, and this is a very dark person here. Like I said, I'm looking on an electronic book, so sorry. It's an ebook. But he does a very good job of putting the pictures in here. Let me go. And this is just in the first chapter. In this book, I will discuss some of the cultures and the tribes that made up the black Native American nations. It is sad that, like the African brothers, black Native Americans organized themselves into small individual tribal villages. Organized as individual tribes and nations made it possible for Europeans to use divide and rule tactics to have the Indians fight and enslave each other. North American Europeans did enslave Indians during wars, especially in New England and the Southeast and in the Southeast. But ordinarily, Europeans, especially English and French, purchased their Indian slaves from Indians. The tribes would then organize themselves into confederations to meet the threats from the enemy Indian tribes. These confederations were made up of black and Mongoloid Native Americans. For example, the Arikos were actually not a people, but a confederation of 6 Native American nations. He goes on to name them: Cayuga, Mohawk, Seneca, Oneida, Odaga, Tuscarora. So he names them. And then he goes on to say, much of what is now Georgia was a stronghold of black Native Americans. These blacks lived predominantly from the Smoky Mountain in North Carolina southward as far as St. Augustine and Florida. I was talking about that in that Hoodoo Medicine book. So now you understand what I'm saying when I mention this book, why this book is so helpful. When you read that book, it makes so much sense, and how the author would sound like they were just meshing things. Okay? The vast majority of Native Black Americans lived in California or along the eastern seaboard in North America. They belonged to many confederations. Okay? Including the Muskegon, I always pronounce this wrong, Algonquin, Choctaw, Tamacraw, Nanticoke, Kashida, Seminoles, Yamasees. The black Native American tribes mainly belong to the Arikos and the Muskegon and the Algonquin confederacies. And then he goes into that. He says, to ensure the black Native Americans would never be able to get their land back, white Americans created the myth that Native Americans were descendants of Mongoloid people from the East Asia. This myth was solidified in the minds of people around the world through the export of American cowboy movies that always depicted Apache and other Mongoloids. Like I said, this book is a must-have. It really freed me when I was looking into myself and really questioning why I kept going back to, why I kept connecting with that land there, and why I really honestly felt like I was from this land, because the way I was connecting with it, I thought I was losing my mind. Until I read this book, The Ancestors Let. You know, when I start studying something, the synchronicity starts. Did you ever experience that? That's how I can tell that Spirit is sending me something. When I start questioning something that the Spirit tells me, the synchronicity starts, and I start running across information that confirms what the Spirit tells me. So, and that's how I really ran up on this book, just doing a lot of research. And it was just like what I needed at the time. You know, some of the questions that I was asking, this book just answered all these questions. It says, Dr. Gates tested the DNA of other famous blacks and found that only Afro-American celebrity to carry the Native American DNA was Oprah Winfrey. Some people took this news as a joke and used it as evidence that DNA testing was not accurate because Winfrey, they thought, was too dark to be of Indian ancestry. These people were wrong. The vast majority of Native Americans that formerly lived in eastern and southeastern United States were black Native Americans with dark skin and kinky and straight hair. These black Indians carried the major Native American haplogroups, especially the haplogroups R1 and X. Dr. Gate was hoodwinked. R1 is Y chromosome, and then he goes on to explain it. He goes into this scientific explaining the DNA. This book is very good. And like I say, he goes into comparing DNA percentages, you know, it's really a book to have, especially if you really want to get some facts going up there. I think I have. Okay, the probable settlement, and then he talks about the Malians on the northeastern shore of the United States. I think they were from Mali. I want to say that because he calls them Malayans, and he said, "Oh, this is really good." The probable settlement of Malayans along the northeastern shore of the United States and the mounds inhabited by black Native Americans, like the Choctaw, explained the presence of the SSA genome RM173 in North America. Again, he's comparing his DNA. You know, then he goes on talking about the natives in Oklahoma. Due to the Native American slave trade, many black Native American owners in the West Indies, other Native Americans were forced to work on plantations or sold into slavery. So like I said, a lot of Native Americans were enslaved in their own land. You see that with the Gullah people. Remember, you'll read in history, they don't like talking about this history, but when they had some slave rebellions, it was mainly some of the natives who already knew this land, so they knew how to use the land to fight off some of the European colonizers. So they don't like talking about those rebellions. And I think the Gullah people, if I'm not mistaken, there was some rebellions among them too. You know, they'll like to tell, and that's why they tell you the Native Americans and the black people fought together. The Africans fought together. They'll mesh that together. There's a reason why they're meshing it together, because they're one in the same. So be careful how you view that information. They'll tell you that they're you know, it's very complicated. I don't know why they do that. You know, it's confusing when they do that. Using systems of divide and rule, whites were able to get Indians to capture each other and sell their captives as slaves. Since the ancestors of the black Native Americans had originated in Africa, they began to be identified as slave Indian, free man, and finally colored. You'll see that too. I saw that in our Black History Museum, where they had black freed men here. They call them freed men, and they have them listed at the Mosaic Templars here in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's our Black History Museum. So when you hear the word color or free man, and they were also called Negro too. They were called Negro too. So they're talking about black Native Americans. That's what they're talking about. So like I said, this is a really interesting book to have. I do recommend it. Everything is cited in this book. This author cites cites everything. Chapter 2, and that was just in chapter 1. Chapter 2, the first black Native Americans. Several types of blacks entered the Americas, included the Khoisan, Anu, or the Negrito type, and the Proto-Saharan variety of blacks. Up until recently, it was believed that the first humans crossed the Bering Straits 12,000 BC to enter the North American continent. America is highly suggestive of the fact that the earliest settlers on the American continents came from Africa before the ice melted at the Bering Strait and moved northward as the ice melted. Now, I talk about that a little bit in my book, Matriarch the Patriarch. I talk about how all these, I talk about the matriarch culture and how they were present at all these places. Even when you follow the symbols, you see the presence of people of color was all over the continents, you know. So that presence was there. Now, it's not talked about, you know, I have no control over that, but the presence was there. The oldest skeletal remains found in Americas are of blacks. Marquez observed that it is good to report that a long ago, the youthful America was also a Negro continent. Dr. Dixon noted that as early as 70,000 BC, Astroloid and later Negritos crossed the Bering Straits to reach the New World. His dating for these early blacks crossings, the Beringa, is far too early because the ice made it impossible to cross from Asia to North America until at least 12 to 15,000 years ago. And so they know this. See, archaeologists, they already been documenting this stuff. This guy did an excellent job of doing the footwork on this and collaborating on all this. I enjoyed the book, so I'm sure you will. Let me go back some. I had something highlighted. This is probably going to be a long book review because I love this book, and there's so much good stuff in here. It's so much good stuff in here, so I'm going to probably keep you a minute on this book review. I thought it was very, very interesting. You know, I thought it was very, very interesting because this information is not talked about. It says, some of the researchers reject the idea that Malayans came to the America in 1310. They based this conclusion on the myth that the first Americans came to America as slaves. The art of the American mound builders in Brazil indicate presence of Malayan military personnel. And he goes on to talk about how this black presence was already here, and these people were the mound builders. And he gives all types of artifacts, archaeological finds to show you that the presence was already here. That's in chapter 3. And then chapter 4, Native Black Americans in the Carolinas. Black Native Americans had many wars, first with the Spanish, later with the British colonists. These black Native Americans lived on the Atlantic seaboard from New York all the way down to Florida. These black Native Americans fought bravely for their lands. Some were sold into slavery into the Caribbean, while others were made slaves or identified as Negro freemen in the South. You know, like I said, this history, it blows your mind. It really blew my mind as I began to read this, because this stuff was not, gosh, it was not talked about in school. So it really blew my mind just reading this. And I was like, oh my gosh, like everything. And I have thought this stuff. I have thought this and had a theory of it. But to go and look at the history and see that it's actually fact, it really blew my mind, because I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this is actually true. I only had a theory of this, but now when I actually see evidence that this is true. It says black Native Americans were made into slaves by colonists. Some of them were even sold into slavery in the Caribbean. There were some black Cherokee, but for the most part, the Cherokee migrated into territory originally occupied by black Native Americans in Creek, Yuchi, and Yamasee. At first, the Europeans identified the black Native Americans as Indians, but over time, because of the Carolina Indians were predominantly Negroes or blacks, both African and black Native American slaves were called Negroes, especially after the Yamasee War. See how interesting that is? The black Native American, for the most part, were peaceful people when the British colonists arrived. They hunted and fished and grew crops to support themselves. And it gives you a part of a Native American map in here. I like the part when he talked about the boats, because that's a misconception too, where people think that Africans wasn't able to come over here. And it's another YouTuber too, I forgot his name, but I liked his channel. Chemistry liked this channel. So if you can go look at our liked videos, go look, because I liked a lot of his videos. But a lot of people think that Africans were not, didn't have the ability to sail back and forth. This author, someone had documented, maybe one of the explorers had documented that they saw these black Native Americans and these Africans traveling on these big old dugout boats. They were made of cypress tree, big giant cypress trees that were dug out into boats. And he said they were huge and they could fit so many people on there. You know, they were huge because back then I'm sure there were very huge trees. And so they would use these trees, dig them out and make these big old boats and sell, you know, use that current. Because that Mississippi current will take you into the ocean if you ride that current, if you knew how to ride that current. And back then, they were master navigators. They knew how to navigate that current, and they would take it back and forth. So it was not far fetched. And this author talks about that in this book. I thought that was interesting because that really blew my mind. Because that was one of my questions. I was like, well, you know, how can we really prove this African theory? And this author goes on into explaining how some of the explorers had documented watching these black Native Americans sail and how they were using these and you can see that too at the Toltec Mounds Archaeological Center. They also have a dugout boat there showing you how they, you know, dug out the trees and made boats, canoes, whatever you want to call them. I probably can't find that. It's probably, and like I said, it's a lot of information in this book. I like this too. He says, this is chapter 8. It says, many mound builders had come with Abukari in 1310. The black Native American mound builders had come from the ancient empire of Mali. I told you because he was calling them Malians. Okay, West Africans had a highly developed knowledge of boat technology and navigation sciences. The canoes they built from gigantic trees were as big as boats sailed from the America by Columbus. Much of what we know about African nautical sciences come from Vasco da Gama. Vasco da Gama is said to have found information about the West Indies from Ahmad B. Majid, whom he met along the west coast of Africa. Majid wrote a handbook of navigation on Indian Ocean, Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, Sea of Southern China, and the waters around the West Indian Islands. Majid is also said to have modified the compass. When Balboa reached America, he found Negro veritables and true blacks. Balboa noted Indian traditions of Mexico and Central America indicate the Negroes were among the first occupants of the territory. This is why so many Mexicans have African faces. In ancient America, it would appear that many mounds were built by Africans. These mounds were built between 200 BC and AD. Many of the late mounds in the United States and South America were probably built by some of the 25,000 colonists from Mali who sailed in the direction of the Americas in 1310. So, like I said, this is a very good book. I recommend it. And I think it's, you know, this history needs to be looked at. It shouldn't be ignored. I really enjoyed this book, and I hope you enjoyed me giving a book review on it. You can get this book from Amazon. I'll leave a link here for those of you who are interested in the book. I wanted to tell you about our next video. It's going to be interesting as well. I'm going to talk about Obeah. That's something for you to research until I bring this video. But I'm going to talk about Obeah, and that's what many of the black Native Americans in the West Indies were already practicing. It's a form where hoodoo and all of that knowledge kind of branched off from. It's one of the most oldest occult practices in the world. And I'm going to come back here and we're going to talk about Obeah. Okay? Thank you so much for following us and subscribing to us, supporting us. Light and love. May the ancestors be with you.